Welcome to an exclusive episode of Kevjet, the podcast. I'm your host, Kevjet, and this week we're shaking things up. I'm stepping out of my usual role and taking a seat in the hot seat as Canadian television presenter Nancy Regan takes the reins and interviews me.
So let's start at the beginning. So the whole idea of this is to allow your listeners to know more about you because you're always shining the light on your guests. And so I love the idea of facilitating this opportunity for people to really get to know more about you.
So tune in and get to know the man behind the microphone, your host, Kevjet. We'll delve into my fascinating journey from the humble upbringing in Wedgeport, Nova Scotia, to my bold move to London, where I now call home.
How did you come to have this amazing group of friends called the Golden Girls?
So the Golden Girls.
I know you've told that story a little bit on your podcast when you've had them on.
Sure.
But I can't, we can't have this conversation without talking about them.
Join us as we explore the origins of Kevjet, the podcast, and uncover some of its most memorable moments. From heartfelt conversations with inspiring guests to hilarious and thought-provoking discussions, we'll dive deep into the magic that has made this podcast a must-listen for so many.
Let's stick with the theme of gratitude for a moment because you've made reference to the fact that you are very close to your family. So I would love to know how your parents made you who you are. I'm honored that you asked me to help amplify your voice and to let your listeners and now viewers know more about you. Life should be Kevjet.
Don't miss out on this special episode where the tables are turned and I get the chance to share my own story. So grab your headphones, sit back, and let's embark on this unique and exciting journey together on Kevjet, the podcast.
Kevjet.
Nancy.
How did you become Kevjet? That's my very first question.
From out of high school, I was a flight attendant.
Right.
And so it was the time when Hotmail came out. I had to find a handle for Hotmail and I was Kevjet at hotmail.com. And don't email me at that because it doesn't exist anymore, but that was me. And so the name stuck, the nickname stuck, and I was always known as Kevjet. And going throughout life, it was shortened by my in-laws as Jet. And so Nick calls me Jet. And so if he calls me Kevin, there's usually a conversation to be had.
There's trouble a brewing.
It is. So yeah, it's always just stuck.
Oh, that's cool. I think you missed the boat. You should have called yourself Hot Kevjet at Hotmail.
I should have.
I'm surprised you didn't, knowing you.
Exactly.
Okay. Tell me so the whole idea of this is to allow your listeners to know more about you because you're always shining the light on your guests. And so I love the idea of facilitating this opportunity for people to really get to know more about you and to get to know you more. So let's start at the beginning. Tell me rewind from that time when you became a flight attendant. Go back to the beginning and tell me the story of Kevin before Kevjet.
Jeez. How long do we have?
Yeah, you asked for this, so I'm serving up the questions, brother.
I was born and raised in the tuna fishing capital of the world, which is Wedgeport, Nova Scotia. And I come from a long line of very proud Acadian people. So I have a lot of strong blood in me. I was the only grandson on both sides of my family until I was, I think, 20 years old. And then my youngest cousin was born and it was finally a boy. But at that point, I was moving away. I had graduated from high school. So I was surrounded by very strong women and men growing up and very influenced by their strength and strong minds, stubbornness. And so when I had something in my mind, I was going to do it. It continues now.
Is that true even when you were a really little kid?
Yeah, I was always surrounded by very strong people, the community, I love the sense of community at home, the Acadian people. I love the Acadian festival every year. That's one thing I miss being over here in England. It's just something, it's just part of me. I just love the history. I just think that I'm proud to have that blood running through my veins.
Well, it's interesting. I made sure I had a Canadian mug today just for you so that you'd feel more, connected to your country, your former country. But I'd love for you to tell that history of Acadia because I think a lot of your listeners would not know what that means. And it is such a rich, rich chapter of our history in Canada, but also the world.
Definitely. I've thought of it a few times to cover that on a podcast. And I know a lot of great Acadian historians. I just thought that maybe it was a topic that when you're first starting out was something that people wouldn't tune into. But, it's definitely something I'm going to set up.
I've got a great guest suggestion for you.
Perfect.
Her name is Aldea Landry, and she is from northern New Brunswick. And she was a minister in Frank McKenna's Liberal government. And she was a woman ahead of her time, and she is a firecracker. I won't say her age, but she's, a fair bit older than me. And she was really a trailblazer, but she also tells Acadian history in a very compelling, dynamic way.
Amazing. Amazing. I definitely will look her up. Let's connect.
I'll connect you for sure.
I've traced back my Acadian history on my father's side back to France. And if you were to say great 18 times, I've found those grandparents in France.
Wow.
Yeah.
At what point in your childhood, adolescence, or adulthood did you realize that you were not going to be marrying a girl someday?
I was brought up in a French Catholic community. You were going to find your partner. You were going to marry her and provide for her and love her and have a family for the rest of your life. And I was prepared to do that. Yeah, it's just crazy. I met somebody that we were traveling because in Halifax, Dartmouth, there's a ferry that goes across the harbor for people that don't know. And I was traveling daily across the harbor. And this guy sat down beside me one day. We sit together all the time on this journey. Shall we go for a drink? Let's go to the pub. And so I was like, sure. So I think we went to the Split Crow. That was like our hangout. It never dawned on me that he was gay ever in my wildest dreams. He just turned and kissed me. It was the most natural thing that I have ever felt in my life. It was just that moment where the light bulb went off and I was like, this is something I need to look into because this did not feel wrong.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's not like you had been living a totally inauthentic life in that other relationship with the young woman.
No.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Maybe in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't know. I felt like maybe I didn't have a preference and I just thought that was normal. But the normal thing was to marry a girl and settle down and have children and do all those things. She was so supportive of me. She stayed with me through that whole process and helped me explore all that. And I'm so grateful to her. I hope someday I get to bump into her and thank her for that.
That's an amazing gift.
Yeah. She's an amazing person. So wherever she is in the world, I hope she's doing amazing things.
It's like she helped you birth your gay life.
She did. And let me tell you, it's a crazy life.
It's interesting because gay is a word that has been attached to derogatory meaning for a long time. And before that, it was just meant to mean joyful. And I feel like it's coming full circle. And you are like the greatest ambassador for the word gay because you are both queer and so joyful.
I
Is
hope
that a
so.
strange thing to say?
I hope so. You know what? It probably would have made me feel really uncomfortable to hear that a few years ago. I think the younger people are taking that queer word back, where I think I'm just that generation ahead of them, where I was like that. Whenever I heard that, it made me feel really uncomfortable. But I'm starting to embrace that. The younger generation are embracing that and owning it and making it a fabulous thing.
Well, I actually have had a bit of a journey with that word as well because I didn't feel like I could use it. And I have a couple of younger friends who are queer young women and they just throw it around so easily. And I said one day, I don't want it. Like, it's okay for you to say it, but I feel like I can't because I have this history attached to it where it was thrown as such an insult
Hmm.
at children, in my day. And so it just feels wrong. And they've gotten me past that. But I'm glad that you gave me that very full answer because
And
there is
and
an age difference.
yeah, and in my day, if I would have heard that word thrown at me, it would silence you immediately. You would never speak about your feelings, or you were just like, okay, we can't have this discussion. That person doesn't understand.
But it sounds like you didn't have that trajectory that a lot of young gay men have, where you're having those sorts of slurs thrown at you, or you're living a secret life. It's like you kind of skipped that chapter, maybe.
I I don't know, had I come out in high school, how accepted it would have been. I didn't know a gay person until I was probably 19. Like, it was such a foreign thing for me. I think that's why I wouldn't have even dreamt of exploring. Yeah, it was a foreign object in my world. It was something I didn't understand myself.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. Join us each week on the Well Beyond Medicine podcast as we explore the 80% of child health impacts that occur outside the doctor's office. Listen and subscribe at nemourswellbeyond.org, where you'll hear pediatric experts, researchers, and policymakers from around the world discussing ways they are revolutionizing children's health. I'm your host, Carol Vassar. Let's go.
Let's go. Well beyond medicine.
So being a flight attendant, that seems like it would give you quite a lot of opportunity.
I thought you were going to say it's a very gay thing.
Well, you can take it there if you want. Go in that direction. Tell me what it was like, this career of yours early
It
on.
was great. I loved it. It was lots of fun. I mean, it was pre 9/11. That took the fun out of flying. Yeah, no, it was fun. I had great friends, and obviously I met lots of gay people while I was flying, and but I was still sort of like, I had my wall sort of up, and at that point I sort of had a double life because I was with my girlfriend at that time, and I had met this guy in the city, but people I was flying with didn't know that. So it, like, everyone knew about me and my girlfriend, and that's just the way it was. But oh, how the tables had turned after that.
Well, it's like you could be a different person once you took off.
Yeah, and it's very, like, the stories you do hear of people flying are very true. It all does happen. But then there are some great stories, and I have great friends who are still flying, and they've been married to other people in the industry for their whole careers, and they have wonderful lives.
And so how long did that chapter last?
I think I flew for about 5 years.
And were you flying just in Canada, or what
No,
was
so we
your
did international.
flight plan?
We did like Cubas and Mexicos and all those types of things.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, you would have been, I can't help but think you would have been amazing at it.
I loved it. It was a really fun time in my life. I'm very thankful for it.
It's an example, I watch flight attendants, and they're a great example of how people can bring very different energy. You can choose to just be going through your work as drudgery, and people around you feel that. Or sometimes you encounter a flight attendant who just is bringing light, and they make you feel good, and they might make you laugh, and it changes the chemistry of people's days. I can't help
Definitely.
but think you would have been like that.
And flying isn't fun for a passenger because you're constantly being told what to do and how to do it, and you have to sit there with your seatbelt on, and it's just not a fun thing. It's just easy to smile at somebody and give them a joke or give them 5 minutes of your time.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's just so easy. Why wouldn't you?
Exactly.
I heard someone say the other day, it's even good just to act like a good person. It was Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General in the US, and he's done so much work around loneliness and connection. And he said, actually, it's a very good practice. Just if you're not naturally inclined, act like you think a nice person would act. And it helps your own mood and your sense of self.
It's so
So
true. It's so
you didn't
true.
have to do that, though. I know. So why did you change?
Then I went into healthcare, so into nursing, which is probably something I always wanted to do. I I think I needed that little adventure beforehand, and I really gained a lot of confidence traveling around the world, especially coming from a small town where I was born and raised, and it kind of opened up the world to me. And I mean, the world was my oyster at that point. Nothing fazed me. I could take on any adventure at that stage. And I did. And I went into healthcare and I worked with dementia and palliative care. And I was thinking about it today, and it must be 20 years ago. It's 20 years ago this year.
Were you out when you went into nursing? Because in those days, there were not a lot of men in the profession.
Yeah, I was. And I remember, and still, I've had lots of discussion with other people, whether it's on other podcasts or just conversations in general. But I think I'm just that generation where I constantly still feel when you meet somebody new, you're coming out, and you still get that little, your heart stops for a second because you're like, how is this person going to react to that? But every time you meet a new person in your life for the rest of your life, you're coming out. And it's just something I think people don't necessarily realize.
No, I've never thought of that, to tell you the truth. And it's something that I would never have to think of because people assume that we are binary and that we're heterosexual. That's the assumption.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a very unique point of view, that it's like coming out to everyone you meet.
Coming out was traumatic enough for me to tell my family. It was no big deal. It was kind of a hangover because they were just like, oh, thank God you told us, and we can, like, we're so glad you told us, and this is your life, and you're going to be happy. Where I was expecting this big army to hit me with all these blocks, and that wasn't the case. So I sort of had a hangover, I call it. But if you were a young person that went through a horrible, horrible time coming out, I can't imagine how that will feel for the rest of your life when you start a new job, or you meet a new friend, or you go to a stranger's party.
Yeah, you're just triggered every time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that's something I'm very mindful of.
I think that's a really important message, for young people especially. I think it's so crucial to hold up a mirror so that people see themselves. And that's been the most powerful thing I know about my own journey with my book, but you probably have had that experience with your podcast.
Yeah. I mean, the podcast has been something that sort of just happened, and I mean, you have a lot to blame for that. you're in that hot seat. I shouldn't say blame, because it was actually a huge gift that was given to me to be able to do that, and you have been my mentor through it all. So I have to thank you for that, not blame you for that. So thank you.
Oh, look, I love your gumption. That's a good old-fashioned word. You have gumption coming out your ears. And the idea that you just decided, I'm going to do this. And I have no background really in it, but I'm just going to start a podcast, and you figured it all out. What was the impetus for what was the grain of the idea at first?
What happened was, obviously, we were on your podcast, The Canadian Love Map, and that sort of like lit this little fire in me, because I felt like I knew nothing about, I had never listened to a podcast before.
Come on, really?
Yeah, never, ever.
I didn't know that.
No. And so I just thought, okay, we're going to do this. We did it. And I was like, you know what? That was a lot of fun. I love the fact that it's a life story. It's a true story. You're telling your story. I love that. It just lit this fire in me. And I went out with a friend who works in the music industry that week. She works with numbers, and she looked at my Instagram and she was like, Kevin, I really think you should do something with this platform you have, because not everyone has this platform. I just thought, I have the most boring life. She said, Kevin, you have the craziest friends and so eclectic. So you could literally do a whole season with your friends alone and you would be a success. And I thought, you know what? I'm not comfortable being that host. And I had a whole list. I agreed to do 5, as you know. I'm almost finished season 2 and I have 36 episodes.
Amazing. And you love it.
I love it. I mean, I am learning. Every episode, I learn so much. I ask the questions that everybody wants to know because I want to know them as well. So it's not like I'm pretending to want to know something. And the questions that people are scared to ask people are the questions that I'm going to ask. So I try and make everyone feel comfortable as if we're sitting in the pub having a drink and we're just having a discussion.
I think it's driven by curiosity more than anything.
100%. I think it's a selfish thing because I want to know these things. It's funny. I was thinking today, a few times, a few friends of mine, straight friends, have said, "Oh, it's another gay episode." I know they don't mean it in a negative way, but perhaps if they gave it a chance, they would take a positive message that they weren't expecting.
Yeah. I mean, no one has ever said to me, "Oh, you're doing another straight episode."
That's what I mean. You listen to any other podcast, and that's what I'm like. So does it matter? To be fair, I don't have a theme, and that's my favorite part of my podcast. So there's no running theme. Every week is a new guest with a whole new conversation and a whole new lesson.
What have you learned from your guests?
I did an episode with 2 trans women. I have been friends with one of them throughout the whole transition. But again, it was all those uncomfortable questions that I didn't feel that I could ask, but I supported her through her journey. When she came onto my show was a whole new story because I knew all the questions that I wanted to know. And if I wanted to know them and I'm in the community, what would somebody who's outside the community be asking as well in their head, but scared to ask? So I asked all those questions. She answered them very open and honestly. A neighbor who is nearing 80 listened to that episode and said to me, "I am so thankful that you did that episode because I understand it now."
Whew. That's what it's about.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps because you forget when you record something. And I think you're probably the same. You record it, it goes out into the world. You don't necessarily forget about it, but you forget that it's accessible and people are still listening to it. And so I'll randomly have someone come up to me and say, "Oh, I listened to this episode the other day," or "I listened to this and wow, I didn't know." And they continue to tell me the story. And this actually meant this to me. And I related with this. And so that's what success means to me when someone comes up to me and gives me the compliment about my guests, because that's the whole point.
Yeah. And it brings meaning to your life. There's a real purpose there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
It's,
great.
I mean, my name is there. My name is on the tin, but the episodes are not about me. My episodes are about my guests and their stories, and everybody has a story. And I find sometimes if you find it difficult to probe and maybe get what you're actually looking to get from that guest, I do a fun thing at the end of the episodes, which are a quick fire questions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I get more out of those answers than I do our whole conversation.
Yeah, there's something about that. When I used to, well, I still do it sometimes, but particularly when I was interviewing for news, I would often wrap up an interview on tape by saying, what have we not talked about that we should?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this, people realize, oh, this is the end. So they kind of scramble their thoughts together and think, oh yeah, I want to make sure I say this.
Yeah.
So it can be powerful.
That happened this week. We got to the end and I said, "Is there something that I didn't ask you that you wish I had?" And he said, "Actually, I would have liked to have said this." So I said, "Great." We hit record and I just re-asked a question and I threw it. You can't even tell that it wasn't part of the conversation. He was so thankful that he was able to get that point across.
Give me some other examples of guests you've learned from.
Oh, gosh, I have such a wide range. So I don't have a theme. So let's start with my musical guests, Heather Rankin. And she told me some little tidbits about the Rankin family from home, which I never knew about, which were great because we were all brought up with the Rankin family and we all love them so much. That was a heartwarming conversation. I loved it so much.
She's
She was
wonderful.
amazing. Ty Herndon opened up with me, a country singer in America, about his struggles with addiction, suicide attempt, all because he was hiding that he was gay in the industry in the 90s. And he was so open and honest and has become a really great friend of mine. So that was a really powerful episode. Jan Arden, she's very open and honest with all of her views, as always. And you can't shut her up, which I love. And she's like that in real life. So she's not pretending to be anybody she's not. Christina Martin, who's a great friend of ours. Jessica Clemens from Jess and the Bandits, who's one of my dearest friends. Cy Kernan from The Fix. I can't even name them all. One person I recently had was Wendy Buffrey, who is a sub postmistress here in the UK. She was tried and convicted for the post office scandal here in the UK. I think the sum that they were trying to say she was guilty of stealing, is what they said, was something like £38,000.
Wow.
So she had to sell her house. She lived in a van at one point with her husband. She was homeless. During her trial, her son was killed in a tragic accident. She lost her father during the trial, so he didn't know that she was not guilty of these offenses, even though they knew she was not guilty, but they weren't around for the government to prove that she wasn't. She's been exonerated. There's numerous people who committed suicide during that process out of shame, even though they knew they weren't guilty of all those horrible offenses. That's going on in the UK right now. It's headline news every day. The UK is backing them 100%, which is amazing. There is a series, it's a docu-series. It's called Mr. Bates, the Post Office Scandal. So if you can pick that up when whatever country you're in, pick that up, watch it. And you won't believe what these people have gone through. And they're still fighting today.
That's tragic.
Yeah.
You know, Joni Mitchell has a lyric that one of my sons has tattooed on his arm, actually, that says, "I see something of myself in everyone I meet." And would you say you can relate to that, meeting all these people through interviewing them?
100%, 100%. It's amazing because everybody has a story. If you make them feel comfortable, they will open up with you. You can have the most amazing conversation. And some weeks I can record 5 episodes in 1 week. It's a lot. And sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, my brain is just going crazy because some of these episodes are intense and some are fun. There's a fine balance. I recently had one with the TCS Everyday Psychics. I had a friendly ghost who lived in my house called Frederick. They showed him the light and he left my house. And they did this all live during my podcast. So
did you know that you had a ghost?
Yes. And I always joked that I called him Frederick. It was like a joke that it was a name we just picked out of a hat. Who knows who he really was. Pam, one of the psychics, was a guest on my podcast. She's a paranormal psychic and medium. In conversation, I said, I have this friendly ghost in my house and and she says, Kevin, there's no such thing as a friendly ghost. You should never have a ghost coexisting in your life. And she gave me a list of all these reasons. And then I thought, oh my gosh. I invited her and her sidekick back, and they did a little ghost hunt in my house. And you can find that on my podcast. It's quite interesting because she also reads me. She sees a neighbor who I took care of in her last days who comes and thanks me, which is amazing. And she would never know these details. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, that takes me back to your role as a caregiver. You worked with elderly people and infirmed people, and I can only imagine that your empathy would have served you so well, but it probably was also forged during that time. Would you say?
Definitely. It's a special time. If you get to sit with somebody who passes away and you're sat there holding their hand, that is a gift to me. I worked with people that you said previously just go to work because it's their job. And you see the difference. I tend to say, if you're going to go into nursing, don't do it for a job, do it because you love to do it. And it's going to show.
What are the obstacles and hurdles that you've overcome in your life that have really forged your character, made you who you are?
Oh my goodness. That's a deep question, Nancy.
You asked for it.
Oh my goodness. I think probably being my true self took a lot of work because it wasn't the plan. I think my brain was I was going to get married and have 2.5 children in the minivan and the picket fence and all that type of thing. My life took a turn, but it wasn't for the worse. It was for the better. And I have all those things now, minus the children. They're furry children that I have. Growing up where I grew up, I never once would have thought that I would say I was living in London and had the life I have now. But that's not to say that if that's where you're growing up today, that it isn't possible. You should have that in the back of your mind, that you could do anything, no matter where you're born and raised.
What's the hardest thing you've ever gone through?
Most recently, so during COVID, I had a couple heart surgeries. And so I was in intensive care in the height of COVID for a month with no visitors in London, one of the biggest cities in the world, but never felt so alone in my life. Nick couldn't even come visit me. I was the only patient on the ward that actually left alive.
Oh my gosh.
That was the toughest thing I have ever gone through. And I think I probably have PTSD in some aspects because of it, because after my heart surgery, I had an internal bleed. I was having numerous blood transfusions, and it was a long road. So it probably took 2 years, at least 2 years, before I actually was back on my feet, and numerous surgeries, lots of support from my family. So my mom would fly over for surgeries. My mother-in-law would fly over. Everybody took turns. My best friend at home, she'd come over, and we would all go with my little suitcase off to the hospital. I couldn't have done it without them. It was difficult, but it was probably some of my favorite conversations took place with my family members as well.
Were you also going through a lot of fear of what the outcome would be? Were you afraid you were going to die?
In intensive care, I was. There was one evening actually, and I feel like I probably had a near-death experience, and I thought that was it. And I was scared. After that, I was scared they were never going to let me come home because I just wanted to come home. And it was like, no, you're not going to go home this week. We need another week. We need more tests. We need this level needs to be this, da, 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 da. The list went on. And of course, being a health professional, I thought I knew better. So it was one of those things that you battled. It definitely made my character stronger. I don't sweat the little things anymore. I have a different outlook on life.
I know that death has, of course, been a part of your life. You've experienced deep loss. Can you tell me about that?
Are you referring to one of my podcast guests?
I'm referring to Michelle.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a difficult conversation to have. Michelle is a friend I grew up with in Wedgeport. Earlier this year, we were speaking on social media, and she told me she had terminal cancer. We talked about her being a guest on my show, kind of being a role model or a voice for people in her situation who didn't know who they could speak to or didn't realize they weren't the only person feeling those feelings. She kept saying to me, and her words were always, little old me, like from Wedgeport, like who's going to listen to this and who's going to care? As time got closer to do the interview, I was getting really, really nervous. And I was saying to my friends, and I remember ringing you and saying, like, how am I going to approach some of these questions? And I was well prepared, thanks to you and to many friends around me. The conversation flowed amazing. She left a gift for her friends and for her family. I don't think she realized what she left It was recorded, not only voice, but on video. After it aired, there's thousands of messages from around the world that came through. Before she passed away, I was able to put them all in a scrapbook. I made a digital scrapbook, and it's the last conversation I had with her because she had just gone into hospital at the end for end of life care. And her messages back to me didn't make a whole lot of sense because she had lots of medication. But her sister started communicating with me actually when I was in Seville, FaceTiming you, was the last time I actually spoke to Michelle. And her sister said that she whispered in Michelle's ear that I had sent my love, and Michelle had a great big smile. And she died, I think, 12 hours after that. She left such a gift. Her message and her positivity and her honesty about death and living, I shouldn't say death, about living, was amazing. For her family to be able to go back and listen to that whenever they want. And the messages from her family alone just make your heart happy. Her nephew, he messaged me and said, I have this for the rest of my life and my children's life, so they'll never not know their Aunt Michelle and the strength that she's left within them. It's so true. After she passed away, because we didn't expect it to happen so quick, I didn't realize the effect it would have on me, because it felt like such a gift that I had to spend that time with her and offer that to her family and her loved ones. But I had to sit and re-listen to our conversation. That was very, very difficult. And it's not about me at all, because it was such a great gift. And I said to you, if I had never recorded an episode again after that, the whole reason of Kevjet, the podcast, was right down to Michelle's message. That was such a gift.
You know, it was such an act of generosity on her part, but I'm sure it also gave her a lot. And I think about my friend Audrey Parker, in the same way, really embraced living until she was dead.
And
Like, she
I
lived
shared your interview
joyfully.
with Michelle, and she was so grateful for that. And that was kind of like the icebreaker for us, because you're unsure how to speak to someone who you know and care about. It's easy if it's a patient, because it's your job, and there's ways of doing it. But when it's someone you really know, it can be difficult to start that conversation. You and I had talked about your friend Audrey. I asked Michelle if she would be okay if I sent her that. I asked you to send it to me. I sent it to Michelle, and Michelle was so thankful. And she was like, I really love this person's attitude. It's really given me joy. Just to see, once Michelle's episode was aired, I was really nervous because we come from a small town, and I didn't want people to turn it around and think that I was using that as a form of promotion, or I wanted them to realize it was not about me. This is Michelle's story, and she's open and honest about it. The next day, when I opened social media, it was something like 700 shares of the episode, right across Canada, right across the world. And it just kept snowballing. The messages coming through were so beautiful. They were either from people in her situation, or they were from loved ones dealing with that situation. But they were all positive, and so thankful that she did that. She loved hearing about it. I put together this digital scrapbook with all the messages from around the world, and they included her loved ones and friends and family, but also people she didn't know. I just had a message this week from her aunt, who said she's having it printed into an actual scrapbook. Maybe I shouldn't say this, because it's going to be a surprise for Michelle's mom for her birthday.
Oh,
and
beautiful.
So I love that Michelle is still part of life, and she always will be.
And that's a testament to the impact, like the profound impact she had on so many people.
Yeah.
I guess when I asked you before about what hurdles and obstacles you've had in your life that have forged you, that's what I'm thinking. I don't think we grow through the easy times. I think we grow through the muck of life, the really shitty, hard times. I think that's where our growth as human beings happens.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I hear what you're saying for sure. Now, I'd love to pivot and go to the subject of love. We kind of skipped over that middle part where you had actually met a partner who you were going to spend your life with. Let's go from being Kevjet, gay flight attendant, enjoying the world, to finding someone who you could really be in a meaningful relationship with.
That happened unexpectedly. I was not looking for anybody in my life at that point. I had gone through a breakup. I was very happy being on my own. I went to visit my mom, who was living in a different city at the time. I went to a beach party in the middle of nowhere in Northern Ontario. At my friend's house, she said, "Oh, why don't we join parties? Because my neighbors are having a party and they have a friend who's visiting from London. He's a musician and he's kind of cool." And I think in their heads, they were like, we have these two gay friends, which people always do. And they're like, of course, they're going to like love each other. And without saying that to us, of course. And so I said, you know what? I'm really cool. Like, why don't we just hang here and have like a quiet evening? And she's like, come on, we're like, it's a beach party. Let's go have some fun. So we went over, and I remember the night like clear as day. And I remember where he was sat and what he was wearing and shaking his hand. And I just thought, this musician from London, like, really? That don't impress me much, like it did nothing for me. So I didn't even stay. I left, I went home. Yeah. So then my friend called the next day and said, the guy that you met at the party is asking if you want to go out for dinner while he's in town. And I was like, well, we were both in town. We were just there for, I don't know, 10 days or something. It just happened to be the same 10 days. And I said, no, not interested. So she called me back and she's like, he's asking if you would rather just go for a drink. No, not interested. The next day she called, what if we have a barbecue out at the lake? The same people that were just like at that party. And I said, if it's going to shut everybody up, I will come and we'll have like a beach party. And we did. And we've been together ever since.
So did it just click that time? What was the difference?
Something clicked. We obviously come from two very, very different worlds. I was dead set on I would never move to I would never go to London. I would never move there, like not in a million years, for starters. How was this going to work? I was in Canada. He lived full time in London. He's a musician on tour. It was like, I didn't want any part of that at all. It just worked. And
some people would find that sexy and intriguing, but you were like,
no. And next year is going to be our 20th anniversary.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
It hasn't been easy. I sort of bring my world, like our two worlds collide 100%. So my healthcare friends and my crazy friends I meet on nights out, and like, we all just mix with the music industry. And whenever we have a party, everybody's invited. Like, we never separate our friends. And I think that's the secret.
Well, also, I know that when you made the leap and moved to London, you found that you were on your own a lot because he was traveling, right?
Yeah. And he had been here forever. So he had no interest in going to Buckingham Palace or seeing Big Ben. So he basically said, here's a pass for the tube, go and explore and get lost, because that's the only way you're going to figure your way around the city. And I was probably scared to death, but I did. And I just got lost and I made friends. And it took time, a good 6 months here in London. I cried every day. I didn't want to be here. I am very family orientated. London's my home.
And how did you come to have this amazing group of friends called the Golden Girls?
So the Golden Girls.
I know you've told that story a little bit on your podcast when you've had them on.
Sure.
But I can't, we can't have this conversation without talking about them.
No. And I spoke to them just before this interview, and I said, of course, we're going to talk about the Golden Girls.
Yeah, because you're constantly flaunting your relationship with them. To me, I get messages all hours of the day and night showing you having the most amazing fun with the Golden Girls and just gloating,
Yeah.
and saying, Nancy, why aren't you here?
When are you coming? I'm planning a Kevjet guest party. I'm not sure what month it's going to happen, but I am planning it. So I'll give you fair warning with no excuses.
Okay.
That's something that's in the works. But the Golden Girls, I met on a random night out in Soho. I was out to meet other friends, Canadian friends, who are known not to show up on time. So I ended up in this little tiny pub and it was very crowded. And I was like, oh, do I stand here and have a drink? One of those awkward moments. And this woman came up to me. It turns out we shared the same birthday. It was the craziest thing. She took me over to her table with her group of girlfriends who were immediately called the Golden Girls because they're a little bit older than I am.
Mm-hmm.
They have much more energy than I do. And they are just so much fun. And we have stayed friends. I mean, we must be talking 16 years now. We are so involved with each other's lives. It's just this crazy connection that we have. So there's 5 of us. We meet a couple times a month. Sometimes it's 1 time a month. It depends how busy everybody is. But we never do the same thing twice. We always have the most fun.
Amazing. And they also really helped you shift gears into being comfortable in your life there, right?
100%. I mean, I met them at probably the most crucial point of being new into the city and feeling lonely and disconnected. And I automatically felt part of a group. I have them to thank for the rest of my life for that. I'm so grateful for them, and everybody knows them. You would be surprised how many people come onto the show and are like, I listened to one of your episodes and it was the Golden Girls.
I love it. Let's stick with the theme of gratitude for a moment, because you've made reference to the fact that you are very close to your family. So I would love to know how your parents made you who you are.
I go back to, it takes a village, is what they say. And it's the truth. My house was the heart of the village. My parents always had the house open to all of our friends, all of our family. Nobody ever was invited. People would just turn up. You don't knock, you just come in. And that's the way I was raised. Every Sunday was family dinner at my grandmother's house where all my aunts and uncles and cousins were there. It just happened. Every event was around family. So we were always with family and friends. Dance parties every weekend in my living room, and my parents would be the ones dancing first with like disco balls, and my friends in school loved it, and it was amazing. So that was the core of how I was brought up. That's how I treat my house here in London. A lot of people come over and they're like, this isn't the way it works in London. We don't necessarily even know our neighbors, and we've lived next to them for 20 years. But our house here in London is an open door policy as well. People just come over whenever they feel like coming in for coffee or tea or a drink. And if it's the weekend, they're like, "Are you guys home tonight? Because we're coming over. We've got our bottle of wine." And I have this thing which my friends make fun of. It's called a party in a bag. So it has a disco light, it has balloons, it has, you name it. If you want to have a party, it's in a bag. And I turn up at my friend's house with it, especially if they're like in a bad mood or something. And I'm like, I'm not having this. I'm coming over. And I come over and I'll have like a silly mask on or a party hat and a funny t-shirt. And then the disco ball comes out and the balloons come out and we just have a dance off for the night. And that's just the way I am. And so I feel glad that I was able to bring that to London.
So it sounds like you inherited your joie de vivre from your parents. What else do you think you inherited from them?
My character, definitely. My respect for people, my willing to help anybody. I think my work ethic, definitely. And my sense of community, 100%.
Hmm. Well, I'm super grateful to your mom because I knew her long before I knew you. And she actually got in touch with me and asked if I would sign one of my books so that she could send it to her son in London. And so when we met so that I could do that, I started asking, what is your son doing in London? And a little bit more. And right away, my alarm bells started going off. Canadian Love Map, Canadian Love Map. These are guests from my podcast. And when we had you and Nick on, there was just something that clicked. Like that second time you finally saw Nick, it was like the friendship click happened. And now I can't get rid of you.
And you know what's really bizarre is we have so many friends in common.
Yes. I know. That's not bizarre, though. It's perfection.
It is perfection. So I expect a really great party when I come home next time.
Oh, and ditto. Okay. I want a party fit for a princess, at least, when I
A
come
queen,
to London.
darling.
Oh, thank you. Not a queen consort, though. I want
No.
a party fit for a queen.
Exactly. The red carpet will be out. Yeah.
That's more perfect.
So I just have a couple facts where my little podcast that I only wanted to do 5 episodes, I now have listeners in 48 countries, which consists of 807 cities.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
It's crazy. And I was that person that said I was never going to pay attention to this stuff. And I log in every week and look at all of my charts, and I'm like, I'm so ahead of it. And it just blows my mind. I'm like, why are these people listening to me?
And this started after I interviewed you on my podcast. So wait a sec, I should be getting a commission.
Well, I do have your podcast on the bottom of my podcast as like my pod roll.
I love
So
that.
I'm going to give you that.
Okay,
And
fair enough.
and I have subscribers. Like people pay voluntary every month. They don't have to. It's out there for free, but people are subscribing, and it just blows my mind. I can't get my head around it. It's crazy. Anyway, I just started the Kevjet YouTube channel, and I'm starting to post the videos of my interviews. I don't know anything about YouTube, so it's kind of, I'm winging it. My main source of listeners are through Apple and Spotify and all the wonderful podcast platforms.
Yeah, I can see you starting to use YouTube Shorts, which actually can get really good traction.
Can they? So they really annoy the hell out of me because I always think I'm about to watch something really gripping, and then it's like, oh no, it was only 8 seconds or something. Yeah.
Oof, it's gone. It can be
Yeah.
longer than that, though. So you can
Okay.
change that.
Well, maybe I should do that then.
Well,
I know
would be
nothing of
interested.
YouTube.
Maybe this will end up on YouTube.
It will go to my YouTube channel, 100%.
I'm honored that you asked me to help amplify your voice and to let your listeners and now viewers know more about you. And I'm just so excited that we've made this connection. And I love the fact that you bring so much fun and silliness to the world. And I use that word very intentionally. Like, you are very playful, but you also are showing up in an important way, and you are your authentic self. And I think that's a really important thing for people to see, that, you can be playful and you can be serious, and you can talk about deep matters, and you can be absolutely frivolous. And life should be all those things. Life should be Kevjet.
I hope more people feel that way as well. Yeah, I appreciate everybody tuning in. I expected my mom to tune in, or I expected, I don't know, my best friend here in London, who doesn't even tune in actually. But
What?
I didn't expect the audience that I'm getting and the feedback. That's what's keeping me going. And as long as people are tuning in every week, I'm going to keep going. Damn it.
Right on, brother. Well, keep up the good work. Keep entertaining us and moving us and, helping us learn, because that's what it's all about.
And thank you to you for being such a great mentor and friend, answering my indulged FaceTimes.
Truly my pleasure, except I still can't believe that I sent a ridiculous video of me dancing in response to a video of you. Actually, I was also singing Miley Cyrus's famous song, Flowers. And then you made it public, and I was like, oh. And I had that reaction at first, and then I was like, yeah, that's hilarious. That is showing up. It's like, there I am.
I thought about it and then I thought, you know what? It is hilarious and it is so fun. So yeah.
You rock.
I mean, I
Thank
only have
you.
thousands and thousands of followers who watched it.
Good. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, Kev. Really appreciate it.
See you soon.